Hello, everyone. You are watching the Asian American Herald, a new media network. This show is being aired via live stream on Facebook, and a recording will be available at our Facebook page, Asian American Herald. My name is Hemani Gupta Carlson, and I'm a professor at Empire State College in Saratoga Springs, New York, as well as a community-based farmer and writer. So I want to open our show tonight first by offering respect to the peoples of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Members of the Confederacy, specifically the Mohawk, are the original caretakers of the lands where I reside, and I thank them for offering me shelter in their territories for the past decade. So for the past several weeks, we have been speaking with Asian American candidates who are seeking office in local and state elections. And many of them are running for office for the very first time. And we're going to continue that theme tonight with our guest, Sarita Bhandarkar. Sarita is a lawyer based in Cornwall, New York, which is in the Hudson Valley, just a little bit south of the Capital District. And she is running as the Democratic candidate for the 99th District of New York State Assembly. So Sarita, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
It's just a pleasure to have you.
I appreciate being here, so thanks.
So I was wondering if you could just start by telling us a little bit more about yourself. Where did you grow up? Where did your family immigrate from? Maybe just some details like that.
Okay, sure. I actually grew up here in the Hudson Valley in Orange County. I grew up in the Assembly District where I am currently running for office, which is kind of crazy. My family came to the States in the 70s. My dad left India in the 60s, went to England. He's a retired surgeon. He went to England to work in a hospital there. He met my mother there, and I'm trying to remember, I didn't talk to him immediately before getting on here, so I'm sure I'm going to get dates and things like that wrong. But they both worked in England in the national health system for 6 or 8 years before he came to the States. So, yeah. So he's from a village outside Mumbai, and my mother is from a mining village in the Midlands in England. And it was actually an Irish doctor that told them to come to America. So they did.
Wow, that's an interesting confluence of events. It reminds me of a family I interviewed several years ago who had come from Kanpur and then gone to Scarborough and then came to the Midwest. That's where I found them.
Yeah. No, he had taken the exam to come to the States as well. But one of his school friends had said, I'm going to England. Why don't you come with me? So and I think they had some other school friends who were already practicing in England. So they just went there. And all the stories that they tell and that my mother tells, I think those were the glory days of being in your 20s and, being in pubs and having a good time when you weren't working in the hospitals. Yeah.
Sounds like a good life. So what made you want to become a lawyer? And I was wondering, how did your work in law take shape after your formal education?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
So kind of a two-part question. First, curious, what made you want to become a lawyer, and how did your work in law take shape after you finished your formal education?
Oh, okay. All right. So when I've always kind of had two main interests. So one was teaching, because I'm also a former high school English teacher. And then when I went to law school, my primary interest from the beginning was actually what I do now, which is estate planning, which is wills and trusts. And over the years, my career has gone much more towards elder law and Medicaid and special needs planning. Whereas early in my career, I did a lot more estate tax planning and gift planning. It's just that the tax laws have changed over the years, and people's needs have changed over the years. And so the focus of my profession has shifted. But I always wanted from the beginning, when I went to law school, that was really what I was interested in doing, was estate planning. And the reason for that was that I wanted to be able to help people take care of their families. am not a confrontational person. So, which is just weird that I'm running for office now, but I'm generally not a confrontational person. I never had an interest in doing litigation. I always wanted to be able to just kind of help people and work with them in a collaborative fashion. So this area of practice worked for me. But I was also really naive in my 20s and didn't realize how much people fight when there's, money involved. so that's the, and I'm trying to think how long it's been now, probably, I guess, 15 years of practicing in law. And I did go back and forth, between teaching as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I watched the video on your campaign page this morning, and it struck me. Yeah, you're definitely not a confrontational person.
Mm-hmm.
You're a very friendly, very gentle kind of person. Mm-hmm. And I was particularly interested in the emphasis you placed on 9/11 and the desire that kind of, really horrendous event kindled in you to be closer to your family. We know South Asians, regardless of whatever their affiliation is with race, ethnicity, with religion, were all kind of targeted as terrorists in the wake of the attacks and suffered many hate crimes as a result. And I was wondering, to what extent did you see evidence of that targeting in the communities where you lived? And, how did that impact you, that desire to be closer to your family? And how otherwise did you respond to kind of that outbreak of attacks and threats?
Okay. I'm trying to think of like the best way to explain that. So I was in my third year of law school in Virginia. I was in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I personally never felt, targeted or like I didn't. I felt fine. But I just felt compelled to be closer to my family in a way that I think was probably very much many people, regardless of background, just felt at that time that it brought into strong relief in the same way that I think the pandemic has, like what is most important in your life. And to me, what was most important was my family and wanting to be closer to them. There were, I have a brother who's a couple of years older than me. And we do remember that when very soon after 9/11, Sikhs were being targeted. People didn't understand different backgrounds, and everybody did kind of fall into this category. My brother, I remember at the time, had a beard. He's like a good-looking guy, and he had this beard and it suited him, and he had it shaved off really quick because my parents didn't want any misunderstandings. So we didn't want, it's like you become aware and that you feel this need to be a little bit more careful. And it is weird. Like, I'm glad that you were asking these questions because in general, people don't ask these questions and you sort of don't have an opportunity to talk about it. But ever since then, if my brother is getting on a plane, he gets pulled aside and he gets searched like every single time. It's not, it just happens. And the same thing has happened, if he goes to like any sort of monuments, any sort of, anything that's sort of considered a national monument, same sort of thing happens. And so I'm aware of it from that perspective, that it has not happened to me, but it happens to this person who is in my family and who I love and who I know him. He's just my annoying brother, and like, it's just so weird that we do get targeted that way. And the same thing happened after Trump got elected. I think people felt emboldened. People who already had prejudice felt emboldened to target people who they perceived as having less of a right to be here than they do. And so I know that I had cousins who, were being yelled at, like, go back to where you come from, and, that sort of thing, which has also happened to me since I decided to run for office. So, and I know the first time I personally really experienced any of those kinds of issues was when I was teaching, really rural upstate New York. And I would get, and it was, I would be bringing current events into the class. I was teaching English, but I bring current events into the classroom because they really actively recruited, the military actively recruited there. And I would worry about these kids because they were really young and they were in high school, but I think because they were in such a sort of sheltered community, like the level of sophistication, I think, varies depending on where you live in the States. And to me, they were very young and very, very vulnerable. And so I would bring in articles and things for them to read. And then I had parents calling and complaining that I was speaking out against the war and that I was probably an Iraqi anyway, and I should just be quiet. And then I was told by the principal, I was told by the principal, that if we're going to have debates, we should probably not have them on like current events or, real issues. They should be on things like ducks versus geese and, just stuff that I'm like, you have the military in the lunchroom pretty much on a regular basis trying to recruit them. They're 15 years old and they've been approached. Like, I feel like they should be aware of what's going on in the world. They should absolutely be making their own decisions, but they should be aware of what's going on in the world when they're making those decisions. They're so vulnerable.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing all that.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever shared all of that before. So, okay.
Thank you so much. It's sobering, but I think at the same time it's really insightful. And it's interesting, of the three people or the three occupations that I think could actually make a difference in things like that, are lawyers, teachers, and politicians. And you're kind of living in all three of those hats. And I'm wondering how, to what extent, if any, did those experiences motivate you to run for office? And what else, also motivated you to run for office?
Okay. I would say those experiences did not motivate me to run for office, because I think they're a part of who I am, but I don't think about it all the time until it's more like it's from the outside. It's how people are viewing you, and you're not necessarily thinking about it until it's brought to your attention, with remarks that are, offensive for the most part. But other than that, it's not something that I'm thinking about all the time. The main reason I'm running for office is because the people that I work with and on behalf of in my community, I don't feel are getting sufficient representation. And most of them are not me. They don't have my shared life experience. They're not from immigrant families, but they are people who I have genuine concern about because they've worked hard all their lives and then they have the misfortune of becoming ill or having a family member who becomes ill. And then they're really struggling. And I think they handle those crises with a lot of honor. And I see how much they really try to help their family members. But financially, it can be devastating for these families if a loved one becomes ill and needs extensive care at home or extensive care in a nursing home. And so those are really the folks that I'm trying to help.
What do you think you could do to kind of help their situation if you're elected?
I'm sorry?
What kind of difference do you think you can make for them should you be elected?
Sure. So I think a lot of the things that I'm most concerned about are things like school taxes. And I think if that becomes very burdensome, particularly for people who are older and on a fixed income, I think one of the things we want to be working on is moving away from using property taxes to fund schools. Some of the Medicaid rules, because a lot of times my clients, they may be able to pay privately for care for a short amount of time, but a lot of them ultimately need to go on Medicaid to pay for nursing home care, which is $15,000 a month, and most people don't have those kinds of resources. Some of the ways those rules are written, which creates a lot of expense for New York State, some of the ways those rules are written are actually more favorable to people who are in like Westchester or Manhattan, because the primary residence, the value of the primary residence that's exempt is so high. I think it's like $890 or something, which for most people in this community is not really the value of their home. You're looking at more like $250 to $350. So, and the average cost of staying in a nursing home is maybe 2 years.
Yeah.
So,
Can you talk a little bit about the demographics of your district? It's, I don't know.
It's not me.
It doesn't need to be just the ethnic and racial demographics, also the economics of it.
Sure. It's a much more ethnically homogenous district, I would say, the way the lines are drawn. We do have, I'd have a much easier time of it actually if I lived in one of the neighboring districts and not the one that I'm in. So it's not very diverse. I think that there are a lot of people who are very, middle class, middle income. There's a lot of people who who are in labor unions or who work for the state. And I think that there's a lot of I'm trying to think about the best way to say it. A lot of the jobs that, folks have in this area, they are struggling because the jobs that they need to have are not the jobs that are here. There's a lot of development, which I think is focused on short-term construction jobs, and those are good paying jobs while they're here. But a lot of what is being built does not then provide. There's a lot of warehouses. Legoland is one of the projects that's going on in Goshen. Those are not going to provide living wage jobs for the region. They're going to provide, hourly wage, $15 to $20 an hour, and that's not going to cut it for people to be able to afford to live here. So that really concerns me, that I want people to be able to afford to live here and have some sort of dignity in their own life. That's, my personal experience was very different. My father is a retired physician. We had a good lifestyle. So, but that's not the average person in the district.
Okay. I have a visitor in my window on the side, but I think she'll wait. My cat.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, I think she can wait. She just started off. So it's interesting that, you say the district is not me, not you.
Mm-hmm.
But you're getting a lot of support. You've got some very strong endorsements, and
I do.
yeah, and so I'm wondering why are people supporting you?
So I think when I said it's not me, what I meant was my background is not like the average person's background in the community. I think that's what I meant, is that it's not, that it's a large immigrant population or anything like that. But I think because I grew up we grew up with other families that were immigrant families, but you got used to the fact that you were not kind of the majority. And so you found ways to find common, I think we're all more alike than we are different, regardless of where we come from, regardless of what our background or our religion is. I think we're always more alike than we are different. And so I think because of that, I think that's what people connect with. And they feel that when I meet with people in my office, and I had hurdles, building my practice. This is a practice that I had to build from scratch. And it took me a good 10 years. And that's, working in other people's practices with clients who were very not all of them, but there's a lot of clients who are skeptical when they first meet you, or they need to talk to you on the phone first because they want to make sure they can understand you, or they ask you what law school you went to, which I know is disproportionately happens to me as opposed to, some of my former colleagues and friends in the area. And so it's really people getting to know you and feel comfortable with you. And that's a one-on-one process. And I've been practicing in this area now for 12 years, and it was slow. But once people get to know you and they feel comfortable with you, that's why I have the support that I do. It's hard earned. And I feel very fortunate to have it. And I do think it's because most people are good, and most people look past. Most people are not the people, telling you to go back to where you came from. That's not reflective of America as a whole. That is a small population.
Yeah. I think it's maybe gets more attention than it should because it's very jarring when it happens. But overall, yeah. And it sounds like your hard-earned following is also a well-deserved one.
Is what?
A well-deserved one.
Thank you. My mother would say that.
So I'd actually like to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Just in interviewing candidates over the past few weeks,
Mm-hmm.
I've actually been very curious about the mechanics of running for office as a first-time candidate and in the midst of a pandemic and in the midst of a pandemic. So I know you launched your candidacy before the pandemic took hold.
Oh, I did.
So what happened? Like, what were your initial plans, your hopes, and then how did it change?
So it all went to hell really quickly. Our initial plans were, I decided to run before the pandemic started, when COVID was just kind of this thing we were hearing about. But, you thought, well, the United States, that won't get that bad. So our initial plan was really going door to door and get, basically, and that's what I was told by people who were already in politics and who already know me, was that that's really going to be your strength, is when you go door to door and people get to know you. Basically, the same way I built my practice was the way that I was going to build a coalition of people supporting me, because I heard enough from the very beginning about, that name, and what are we going to do with that name, and how is this, it was there. I heard it. And so, I just kind of said, well, you know what? It's my name, and people are going to get used to it, and they're going to have to get over it. And by the end of this election, everybody's going to know how to say it. And that would be good. So, but it really did throw me when, we, obviously, and I think like everybody, initially we thought, 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And then, we're still here and we still can't go door to door. So then you're finding ways around that. I did some trainings through Vote Run Lead. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization. Oh, okay. You should check them out because they're really cool. And they had these series of webinars I want to say it was like in March, but time just kind of blurs together now. But it was really on, campaigning and campaigning remotely and how to get your name out there in these circumstances. We've really relied on social media a lot, which takes time and takes kind of, that grassroots effort of people liking and sharing your social media, because grassroots also means like no money. So it's really, you're just, you're relying on your friends and you're relying on people to help you as much as they can. Because the other part was, the fundraising, which is a very big part of any campaign. And, when originally we were told, like, you're going to need X dollars and this is how you're going to have to figure it out, it was before the market had tanked. So we were like, okay, that'll be fine. People are feeling good. Everybody's got a job. We'll figure it out. And then very quickly, and I have a lot of attorney friends, and very quickly people who were associates in law firms got let go because the courts were shut. So people were not making the money they had been making. And it got very scary very fast. And I do, most of what I do is transactional. And I thought, it'll be, I'll be fine. Everything will be fine. And then, clients who were older who weren't comfortable getting online and wanted to meet with you in person. And so they just kept canceling appointments. And so you just kind of think like, I don't know when this is going to be. I mean, now everybody's used to Zoom, but initially they weren't. And so you're just thinking like, I don't know how long this is going to last. And this is kind of scary. So, and I knew people who, it's really unfortunate. I knew not, because attorneys, even if you get laid off, you're like, okay, I can hang out a shingle. Like I'm I'll figure it out. But I know secretaries and paralegals who are at offices for 30 plus years, and then they get let go. And, where are they going to go after that? And it's, I know a lot of people who got let go and who found other jobs, and, but it's a scary time. It was a scary time for people. And so asking people for money for a campaign in the middle of all that, I'm not good at asking people for money anyway. But then, when this is all happening, I'm like, God, give it to the food bank, we'll figure this out. It'll be okay. So that's the other challenge. And then my opponent is, because he's an incumbent, and then he's very well financed and has, corporate PAC money and he's just burying me in negative mailers. But in a way, it ended up kind of helpful, because he could send out way more mailers than I can afford to send out. And so people who didn't even know I was running would get these offensive mailers from him and then go and look me up. And so I actually built some of my followers on social media because he was out there saying I was a socialist and all kinds of crazy things.
That's interesting. It reminds me of some truism that a politician back in my journalism days had said, that the more that your name gets heard, the better it is for you. So let your opponent say your name as much.
Yeah. He has sent like half a dozen negative flyers, but it's my name everywhere that otherwise wouldn't be out there. And the flyers are so ridiculous, the mailers are so ridiculous that unless you're really, really extreme, I don't think that you read them and think that they're true.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, given that this is not the case.
I did, though, if I can just back up for 1 second. All those mailers and his website and his social media posts, all that stuff did then start prompt people saying, go back to where you came from. And with a name like that, what can you expect? And all that kind of stuff, which you're like, oh, okay. It's happening. So it's a little scary when it's happening.
Yeah. This actually ties into a question I asked another candidate a couple weeks ago, which was, I happened to have interviewed her on the night of the VP debates. And I asked about Kamala Harris and what kind of effect that was having. Is that, having her on the presidential ticket, is that helpful for other Asian American candidates and other candidates of color? And the name thing is interesting because I remember a big discussion about how do you say her name properly. And finally, it was clear. You say it this way.
Yeah. So I don't think it hurts. I don't think it hurts to have somebody who is, and I guess because I sort of forget about her background and I just see such an impressive person that I just feel fortunate that I get to be on the ticket with her. So I guess I just look at it that way. She did well in the debate. I think she just in general handles herself well and with such a degree of restraint. And basically, I think we know nobody's allowed to lose their temper except for a certain group of people. So they can get mad and shout. And Donald Trump and his you can get mad and lose your temper, but if you're Kamala Harris or you're, me, I am not allowed to lose my temper, and I don't. So because I know that I'm not allowed to.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And, I think that actually gets me to my question about Asian American representation in New York politics. Asian Americans and that really kind of South Asian Americans are a big part in New York of that contingent, are really a fast-growing demographic, both nationally and in this state. But there's very few elected officials of Asian descent. And so I'm wondering, why is it important to have that representation in local offices, in the state assembly, elsewhere in elected office? And what is it going to take to bring more Asian Americans into those positions?
Well, I think it's important because I think it's important to have every voice in the room. And I think it's important so that people can stop saying, like this is an American name and this is something else, like I'm just really tired of it. So I think it's really important. My father's such a, if you're born here, you're here, you're American. It's an American name because you're born here and that's it. End of story. So, and he's, so I think it's really important that the more diversity there is, the more that people get that we're all Americans, regardless of where we come from, regardless of our religion or our culture, we're all here. I took the same oath, to uphold the Constitution of the state of New York and the U.S. Constitution. It meant something to me when I did that. When I got sworn in as an attorney, it really, it's sort of an amazing experience. And I think all of it, the more diverse our government is, the better we are at hearing the voices of the people we represent. And it's very frustrating to me when I see pictures of, just like all white men, and they're supposed to represent me and they're supposed to know what I think and how I feel. And their experience is totally different than mine. So because they didn't get mistaken for, the secretary and the person who answers the phones and the paralegal and the mailroom person and the stenographer before everybody understood they were the attorney in the room. Like that didn't happen to them. So I just think there's a lot of value in having as many voices and as much diversity as possible to properly represent the diversity that is in this country. And that is what makes this country so incredible. I think there was another part of your question. I'm not sure if I answered all of it.
Okay. That's okay. You actually answered quite a bit, and we are getting short on time. I just close with a final question. We've got our final debate between the presidential candidates, Trump and Joe Biden tonight. And what are you hoping to hear during that debate?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing an actual debate this time as opposed to what happened last time. And, I'm really looking forward to the first time that the mic gets turned off on the president. So, we've got a candidate. I mean, I'm sorry. We have a candidate who has ideas and who is, a credible person. And then we have a candidate that I'm like, really? Because it's just, no.
Okay. All right. Well, on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for our weekly Asian American Herald show. Once again, I'm Himani Gupta Carlson, and my guest has been 99th District candidate Sarita Bhandarkar. The Asian American Herald is a Facebook-based news media outlet dedicated to discussing topics and building community among Asian Americans in the capital region of New York and well beyond. So please send us your story ideas. Look for the recording of this show on our Facebook page, and have a good evening, and make sure to vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks.